This woman's name is Paisley. She's 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago, at her rehearsal dinner, surrounded by everyone she knew, her fiancé stood up and projected her private messages with another man onto a restaurant wall for all to see. Her wedding never happened. Her life imploded in minutes. But here's what nobody expected. She still doesn't think she's the one who did anything wrong. I'm Mrs. Emma, your storyteller, and today I'm bringing you a tale that will make you question everything about relationships, honesty, and the consequences of our choices. This is Paisley's story, told in her own words. Just a month ago, Paisley thought everything was falling into place. She had a wedding date set, a stable fiancé named Wyatt, and the approval of everyone who mattered. On paper, her life looked flawless. But beneath that glossy surface, something had been rotting for a very long time. Paisley and Wyatt had been together for 3 years. He was everything her parents dreamed of. Steady job, good family background, the kind of man who never made waves or caused problems. Her father adored him because Wyatt never disagreed with anyone. Her mother constantly reminded Paisley how fortunate she was to land someone so dependable. But here's what Paisley felt that nobody else saw. Dependable isn't the same as exciting. Reliable doesn't mean passionate. And safe. Well, safe can feel like slowly suffocating. Their relationship had lost its spark within the first 6 months, according to Paisley. Wyatt's idea of romance was ordering takeout and watching whatever streaming service suggested. When he proposed, there were no rose petals, no sunset, no photographer hiding in the bushes. Just Chinese food containers on the coffee table and a ring pulled from his pocket. "Want to get married?" he asked, as casually as if he were asking about dinner plans. Meanwhile, Paisley watched her friends receive elaborate proposals, surprise trips, flash mobs, carefully orchestrated moments that would live on social media forever. But she said yes anyway. She was 25. Everyone around her was getting engaged. And Wyatt seemed safe, predictable. Her parents were thrilled about his family's financial stability and his ability to blend seamlessly into social situations. The wedding planning began immediately, and Paisley's mother took control of most decisions. Flowers, catering, seating arrangements. Wyatt sat through every planning session like a mannequin, nodding along to whatever was suggested, never expressing a single personal preference. It was like planning a celebration with someone who wasn't really there. That's when Paisley's mind began wandering back to someone from her history. Someone named Colt. Colt was her college boyfriend. They'd dated for nearly 2 years, and in Paisley's memory, those years glowed with adventure and intensity. Colt was spontaneous where Wyatt was predictable, exciting where Wyatt was mundane. With Colt, every day felt like an adventure. Midnight drives to watch sunrises, surprise weekend trips to unknown destinations, a relationship that felt electric and alive. Sure, Colt didn't have Wyatt's financial stability. Her parents had called him impulsive and irresponsible. But with Colt, Paisley felt something she'd stopped feeling with Wyatt, truly alive. 6 months before her wedding, Colt sent a simple text. "Hey, thinking about you." Paisley almost didn't respond. Almost. But then she thought, what harm could come from catching up with an old friend? The messages started innocently, reminiscing about college, sharing updates about their lives. It felt wonderful to have someone ask how she was doing and actually listen to her answer. Because Wyatt had stopped listening. He'd gotten comfortable, stopped asking questions, barely remembered details about her job or her day. But Colt? Colt paid attention, real, genuine attention. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered details from previous conversations. He actually engaged with what she told him. 4 months before the wedding, the texting evolved into coffee meetings. Paisley insists they were innocent at first, just 2 old friends talking at a downtown cafe during lunch breaks. They discussed books, movies, travel dreams, childhood memories. Conversations that went deeper than, whose turn is it to take out the trash, or, should we have your mother over for Sunday dinner? Paisley started looking forward to these meetings more than she looked forward to seeing her own fiancé. That should have been a warning sign, but she convinced herself she just needed more intellectual stimulation in her life. After all, she told herself, she wasn't doing anything wrong by having a friend who understood her. But the conversations became increasingly intimate. Colt admitted he'd never gotten over her, that letting her go in college was his biggest mistake. He said he could tell from her social media posts that something was missing in her relationship with Wyatt, and Paisley couldn't deny it. Her couple photos felt forced, staged performances of happiness rather than genuine joy. She started staying late at work just to text Colt without Wyatt asking questions. Not because she was hiding something terrible, she rationalized, but because Wyatt got possessive whenever she mentioned spending time with other men. It was easier to keep the friendship private than deal with his insecurity. Colt understood her in ways Wyatt never tried to. When Paisley talked about dreams of traveling or taking risks, Colt got excited and encouraged her. When she mentioned the same things to Wyatt, he lectured her about being responsible, saving for a house, planning for retirement. The difference felt stark. 3 months before the wedding, everything shifted. At their usual coffee meeting, Colt reached across the table and took Paisley's hand. Just for a second, but it sent electricity through her entire body. She hadn't felt that kind of spark with Wyatt in over a year. Colt looked into her eyes and said he couldn't stop thinking about her, that he'd never stopped loving her even after all these years. Paisley should have pulled her hand away, should have reminded him about her engagement, her upcoming wedding. Instead, she sat frozen, feeling more alive and desired than she had in months. The meetings became more frequent, twice a week, sometimes more. Paisley told Wyatt she had work events and girls' nights. He barely seemed to notice or care, which, in her mind, proved how disconnected he'd become from their relationship. Meanwhile, Colt texted her good morning every single day. He sent funny messages during work. He remembered small details, like when Paisley mentioned craving specific cookies from a bakery across town, he showed up at her office the next day with an entire box. The physical aspect of their relationship developed gradually. Longer hugs when saying goodbye. Colt's hand on her back when they walked together. Then, 3 months before the wedding, sitting in his car during a rainstorm, they kissed. For Paisley, it felt like coming back to life after years of being numb. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted and desired so intensely. With Wyatt, intimacy had become scheduled and predictable, more obligation than passion. But with Colt, everything felt spontaneous and electric. Paisley insists it didn't feel like cheating because, in her mind, there was no real relationship left to betray. She felt she was finally being true to herself instead of going through the motions of a fake engagement. They stopped meeting in public places where people might see them. Instead, Paisley started going to Colt's apartment. She told Wyatt she was working late or meeting girlfriends. She'd spend hours with Colt, talking and reconnecting and feeling like herself again. The confident, interesting woman she'd been before, she felt, Wyatt made her invisible. The texting became constant throughout every day. Photos of random things that reminded him of her. Detailed sharing of her daily experiences. Colt knew more about Paisley's actual life than her own fiancé did, simply because he cared enough to pay attention. Paisley wasn't planning to leave Wyatt or cancel the wedding. The event was already planned and paid for. Breaking up would mean disappointing her parents, dealing with family drama and embarrassing questions, starting completely over at 28. So she kept both relationships alive, thinking she'd figure it out after the wedding somehow. 2 months before the big day, Colt started talking about a real future together. He said watching her get engaged to someone else had been torture. He started questioning whether she could really see herself spending her entire life in such a passionless relationship. When he framed it that way, Paisley started questioning everything. Was she really going to marry someone just because he was safe and her parents approved? What about passion? What about feeling truly understood and alive? But the wedding machinery was already in motion. Deposits paid, invitations sent, family flying in from different states. Then Wyatt started acting strange. He began asking too many questions about where Paisley was going and who she was with, making comments about how distracted she seemed, how much time she spent on her phone. Paisley told him he was being paranoid and controlling, that she needed space to have her own friendships and social life. His suspicion made her feel defensive and annoyed. They fought more than they ever had before. He'd accuse her of being secretive. She'd accuse him of being insecure and not trusting her. These fights, ironically, made her feel more justified about seeing Colt, because they proved how incompatible she and Wyatt really were. 3 weeks before the wedding, Wyatt found a restaurant receipt in Paisley's car. He started questioning when she'd been there, because she'd claimed she was working late that night and grabbed something quick near the office. When Paisley said she'd met a coworker for dinner, Wyatt kept pushing. Which coworker? Why hadn't she mentioned it? Why hadn't she invited him along? Why had she never talked about being friends with this person? Paisley lost her temper. She told him he was controlling and insecure, that his possessive behavior was exactly why their relationship felt suffocating. 3 days before the rehearsal dinner, Paisley made a critical mistake. She was texting Colt while Wyatt showered, getting ready for work. When he emerged, she quickly placed her phone face down on the nightstand without closing the message thread. The next morning, Wyatt's phone was dead. He grabbed Paisley's to check the weather, something he'd done countless times before. That's when he saw everything. Months of conversations between his fiancé and another man. Paisley came back upstairs with coffee and found Wyatt sitting on their bed, holding her phone, looking absolutely devastated. He didn't speak at first, just scrolled through message after message, his face growing more hollow with each swipe. The silence felt suffocating. When Wyatt finally looked up, he said her name like a question, like he wasn't sure who she was anymore or if he'd ever really known her. Then he started reading messages aloud in a flat, empty voice. Messages where Colt said he loved her and missed her, where Paisley said she thought about him constantly, where they made plans to meet at his apartment. Every intimate, private conversation now spoken in Wyatt's broken voice. Paisley tried to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, that the messages were being taken out of context. But Wyatt kept scrolling, finding more evidence that made her explanations sound hollow. Messages about meeting at Colt's place, conversations about how bored and unhappy she was in her relationship, detailed plans to see each other while Wyatt worked. She watched him piece together the full picture in real time. And she knew there was no way to make this look innocent. So instead of defending herself, she went on the offensive. She told Wyatt that this was exactly why she hadn't felt comfortable talking to him about friendships, because he was controlling and possessive. If he'd been paying more attention to their relationship instead of taking her for granted, maybe she wouldn't have needed to find emotional support elsewhere. His reaction surprised her. Instead of yelling or getting angry, Wyatt just looked sad and tired and defeated. He asked how long it had been going on. When Paisley hesitated, he said he could scroll through all the messages himself if she preferred. So she told him, about 6 months, but emphasized that it was mostly just talking and emotional connection. Nothing serious had happened. Technically true, in her mind, because they hadn't slept together. But then Wyatt asked if she'd been physical with Colt at all. She couldn't lie when he was holding months of evidence. She tried to minimize it, just a few kisses here and there, nothing that meant anything. Then he found messages where she and Colt discussed their chemistry and how much they'd missed touching each other. That's when Wyatt finally lost control. He threw her phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. He said he couldn't believe he'd been planning to spend his life with someone who could lie to his face for months while carrying on with another man. He felt like an idiot for trusting her. Paisley let him have it then. She told him that maybe if he'd been a better fiancé who actually paid attention and made her feel loved, she wouldn't have been vulnerable to someone else's attention. This whole situation was as much his fault as hers, because he'd gotten lazy and complacent, taking her for granted. For the next 2 days leading up to the rehearsal dinner, Wyatt barely spoke to Paisley. He moved his belongings to the couch. He left for work early to avoid seeing her. Every time Paisley tried to explain her side, he'd walk away like she was toxic. It felt incredibly unfair to Paisley. She was trying to work things out while he was shutting down and giving her the silent treatment like a child. She figured he just needed time to process and calm down, that they'd eventually work through this before the wedding. After all, they'd already sent invitations. Both families were flying in. Everything was paid for. Surely he wouldn't throw away 3 years over some text messages and a few meetings with an ex-boyfriend. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled at an upscale restaurant Paisley's parents had booked months earlier. Both families would be there, plus the entire wedding party and closest friends. Basically everyone important in both their lives. Paisley spent extra time getting ready that evening. She wore the blue dress Wyatt had always said was his favorite, did her hair and makeup exactly the way he'd always complimented. She was hoping to remind him why he'd fallen in love with her, to start healing the damage. At the restaurant, Wyatt was polite but distant, going through the motions without really being present. Paisley kept trying to catch his eye, to smile, and act like everything was normal. He barely looked at her all evening. Her father gave a beautiful, heartfelt toast about welcoming Wyatt into their family and how proud he was of the man Paisley had chosen. Everyone clapped and smiled and took pictures. For just a moment, Paisley thought maybe they could actually get past this rough patch. Then Wyatt stood up. At first, Paisley thought he was going to give a speech thanking everyone for coming, maybe even apologize for being distant the past few days. Instead, he thanked everyone for being there and said he had a special presentation he wanted to share. Before Paisley could process what was happening or try to stop him, Wyatt had connected his laptop to the restaurant's projection system. Suddenly, screenshots of her most private text conversations with Colt were displayed on the wall for everyone to see. Her personal thoughts and feelings, blown up huge for their entire wedding party to read. Messages where she complained about being bored in her relationship, where Colt told her he loved her and couldn't live without her, where they made plans to meet up and spend time together. Every single person in that room could see everything: her parents, his parents, siblings, the wedding party, extended family, friends, everyone. The silence that followed was absolutely crushing. Paisley watched her parents' faces change from confusion to shock to complete horror. Wyatt's family looked disgusted. Her bridesmaids stared at her like she was a stranger. Then Wyatt calmly announced to the entire room that their wedding was officially canceled. He thanked everyone for coming and walked out of the restaurant without another word, leaving Paisley sitting there with her entire life destroyed. The scene that followed was a nightmare. Paisley is still processing 3 weeks later. Her mother immediately started crying and hyperventilating, had to be helped to a chair. Her father looked like he wanted to disappear from embarrassment. People were actually taking photos of the projection screen with their phones before the restaurant staff figured out how to turn it off. Everyone was whispering and staring at Paisley like she was a monster, even though this was her own relationship and her own business. She tried desperately to explain to her parents that the messages were being taken out of context, that Wyatt was being vindictive and cruel by exposing private conversations like that. But they were too shocked and angry to listen. 3 weeks later, Paisley's entire life has completely changed. Wyatt moved all his belongings out and won't return any of her calls or texts. Her parents are barely speaking to her because they're humiliated by what happened in front of all their friends and family. And they're furious about all the money they spent on a wedding that never happened. About half her friends have taken Wyatt's side completely, saying what she did was unforgivable, and that he had every right to expose her publicly. The other half think he went too far with the public humiliation, but they still believe she was wrong for texting another man while engaged. Nobody seems to understand that she was just trying to find happiness and excitement in a relationship that had become boring and dead. That she was looking for someone who actually appreciated her and made her feel alive again. Wyatt is already dating someone new, a woman from his office. Meanwhile, Colt decided he doesn't want to deal with all the drama and complications and has completely ghosted Paisley. He won't respond to any of her messages. Now Paisley is 28, single, unemployed because she couldn't stand the looks and whispers at her job. And everyone thinks she's the villain. But she insists she's not sorry for trying to find someone who appreciated her and made her feel special. She's just sorry it all exploded the way it did. Her own sister won't take her calls anymore because Paisley embarrassed the whole family. Her best friend since high school said she can't be associated with someone who would cheat on their fiancé and lie about it for months. What bothers Paisley most is how everyone's treating Wyatt like a saint now. People keep posting on social media about what a great guy he is and how he deserves better. They're acting like he was a perfect boyfriend when Paisley lived with him for 3 years and knows exactly how boring and emotionally unavailable he really was. She had to move back in with her parents temporarily because she couldn't afford their apartment alone. Her mom gives her disappointed looks constantly. Her dad barely acknowledges she exists. They keep making comments about how she threw away the best thing that ever happened to her, how she ruined her reputation and their standing in the community. 2 weeks ago, Paisley ran into Wyatt at the grocery store. He was with his new girlfriend, holding hands and laughing. When he saw Paisley, he didn't even acknowledge her, just steered his girlfriend to a different aisle like Paisley was dangerous. That hurt more than she wants to admit. 3 years together, and now she's nothing to him. She tried reaching out to Colt one more time last week, thinking maybe now that everything's out in the open, they could finally be together without secrecy and complications. but he read her message and didn't respond. The man who claimed he never stopped loving her and wanted a future together just disappeared. The second things got difficult. Paisley has been applying for jobs in other cities. Phoenix, Dallas, maybe Chicago, somewhere she can start over where people don't know about the rehearsal dinner disaster. But even that's been harder than expected because somehow word has gotten around. What makes Paisley angriest is that nobody seems to care about her side of the story or why she did what she did. Everyone just wants to paint her as a terrible person who destroyed a good relationship for no reason. But they didn't live in that relationship day after day, feeling invisible and unappreciated and bored. She knows she's supposed to feel guilty and apologetic. But honestly, she mainly feels angry. Angry at Wyatt for humiliating her in front of everyone instead of handling it privately. Angry at Colt for abandoning her after promising he'd always be there. Angry at her family and friends for judging her so harshly when they don't understand what she was going through. Maybe she'll never get married now. Maybe she'll never find someone who accepts her past and wants to build a future with her. Maybe she'll have to live with being known as the girl who cheated on her fiancé and ruined her own wedding for the rest of her life. But Paisley says at least she knows she was honest about what she needed, even if nobody else wants to see it that way. At least she didn't settle for a lifetime of boredom just to make other people happy. And if that makes her the villain in everyone else's story, then so be it. She'd rather be alone and true to herself than trapped in a relationship that makes her feel dead inside, even if everyone else thought that relationship looked perfect from the outside. So that's Paisley's story, told from her perspective. A tale of a woman who felt trapped in a relationship that looked perfect on the outside, but felt suffocating on the inside. A story of choices made in desperation for connection and excitement. And a story of consequences, public humiliation, lost relationships, a completely changed life. Now, I want to hear from you. Was Wyatt justified in exposing Paisley's affair so publicly at their rehearsal dinner? Or did he go too far in his revenge? Should Paisley have ended her engagement to Wyatt before pursuing anything with Colt? Or was her unhappiness a valid reason for seeking connection elsewhere? Was there any way this situation could have ended differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing different perspectives on these complicated situations. If this story made you feel something, whether that's anger, sympathy, shock, or understanding, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover these real-life stories and join our community conversations. Share this video with friends who love discussing relationship drama and moral dilemmas. These are the kinds of stories that spark hours of debate and discussion. And most importantly, subscribe to Mrs. Emma's channel and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a story. I post new tales every week. Stories about relationships, betrayal, revenge, redemption, and everything in between. Real stories from real people navigating the messy complications of human connection. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Mrs. Emma, your storyteller, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, every relationship has two sides, every choice has consequences, and sometimes the person we hurt most is ourselves. Take care, everyone.